for the first SDG, which is the no poverty, the problems are poverty, unemployment, inequality, corruption, lack of education, lack of jobs and livelihood, lack of government support, lack of infrastructures, lack of poor healthcare system, and little to no access to water. As an assessment tool, we use survey form. So for the specific interventions to address the problem, I choose the water filtration system as the MVP because it solves most of the problems in the poverty. Because people needs water to survive and make themselves clean and hygienic. As we all know, lots of jobs require hygiene, proper hygiene for healthy working environment. Next SDG is the zero hunger. So shortages, war and conflicts, corruption, poor healthcare system and water contamination, illness and diseases, lack of government support and food waste, and lack of education. So as a specific intervention to address the problems is using of hydroponics for agriculture, water filtration system for water uses, and ready to plant seeds for planting vegetables and fruits, waste disposals, and bear fruits and vegetables which people can use as. So next SDG is good health and well-being. So the problems are poverty, lack of healthcare facilities, pollution, poor healthcare systems, malnutrition, lack of education, little to no access to clean water, remote places, lack of government support, and corruption. So as an assessment tool, we use survey form. And for the specific interventions is using of mobile hospitals, water filtration system, medicines, and mobile consultations or the internet consultations. So the mobile hospitals are the MVP for these problems because some places are inaccessible. They can't go to hospitals if they feel something wrong with their health. So with mobile hospitals, they can do consultations to remote places. Next SDG is the quality education. So the problems are poverty, lack of teaching materials, inaccessible places, no access to electricity, lack of schools, lack of teachers, inequality. So the specific intervention addressed to solve the problem is mobile classroom, distribution of notebooks, distribution of student materials, electricity, and internet. Education is important, so I see the mobile classroom as the MVP for these problems since it deals most of all of the problems. It provides accessible education to remote places and provides reading materials for students.
The next SDG is gender equality, clean water, sanitation, and affordable clean energy. Using the assessment tool in the survey form, we have identified 10 problems each, and after identifying the problems, we utilize specific interventions to address the problems. We also develop MVP on each SDG, which is the drop box that helps to collect feedbacks and concern for the problems of the gender equality, purified and distilled water to have a safe and readily available water for everyone, and lighting controls to save energy and cash in the long run.
After the activity, I have found out in Goal 8 that in decent work and economic growth that the common problems is high unemployment rate and low job opportunities. So the MVP here is to announce the job vacancies so that the unemployed individuals have the chance to apply for a job to sustain their daily needs. Second, the Goal 9, the industry innovation and infrastructure. The common problem is skyrocketing transportation cost and the oil price hike. So the MVP here is to create an online campaign wherein it focuses on the alternatives or DIYs to help the producers or the manufacturers transport their products to the customers in a low cost and less time consumed. Third is the reduced inequality. The common problem is no participation of child in decision making. So the MVP here is to empower the youth so that the voice of the children will be heard and be part of the decision making.
And number one was the economic decline, given that a city is affected by the economy of its nation or the economy of its locality. And lastly would be the environmental degradation, and that was listed last, given that if all the problems beforehand are addressed, then that would be non-existent. Number four, the specific interventions to address the problem. So we have cities must be recognized as the key players in any ambitious plan. For example, the sustainable development goal, given that this development goal is to create sustainable cities. So that in mind, cities are a key player, the center of this ambitious plan. And then next we have the conversion of energy systems, and then the proactive drive that supports the transition to renewable energy. And then next we have the national government, the support of the national government to develop the cities and its municipalities. And then lastly, recognizing that cities are one of the major contributors of the planet's carbon footprint, thereby making them by default the major players in its reduction of our carbon footprint. And the next SDG, the MVP of the 11th SDG is the acquisition of large-scale investments, given that large-scale investments would allow a locality to build sustainably without harming the environment. And then next would be responsible consumption and production, which is the 12th SDG. And we've also identified 10. And number 1 is the sustainable consumption and production. And lastly is that the problem with overconsumption would be that it fosters disparity. And then we have the specific interventions to address this issue. Number 1, reduce overall consumption. Next, we have encourage responsible production. And then lastly, switch to energy efficient power systems. And then the MVP would be a circular economy, given that this type of economy would allow products or materials to last longer within an economy. And then the next SDG would be climate action. And then we were also able to identify 10 problems with our assessment tool, which is this review. And then we have number 1, we've listed lack of awareness as the number 1 problem. And then lastly would be deforestation. Deforestation is listed last, given that if people are informed about the climate change, or you're informed or are aware of the problems with our environment, then deforestation will be addressed all at the same time. And then the specific interventions to address the problem inform and inspire people to act, innovate solutions, accelerate the transition to renewable energy, and then invest in large-scale renewable energy, and then confront all climate risk. And then the MVP of this SDG would be to disseminate information regarding this issue, and ultimately integrating it into our educational system, thereby making it future-proof. And then lastly would be life below water, which is the 14th SDG. And we've listed improper waste disposal as the number one problem, given that one of the best reasons why there is water pollution and ocean pollution, it's because of human intervention. And that's the number 1 human intervention that causes water and ocean pollution. And the specific interventions are conserve coastal and marine areas, discourage overfishing, encourage sustainable fishing, enforce sea law, and reduce marine pollution. And then the MPP for this issue would be to provide substantial economic benefits to anyone that utilizes marine resources sustainably. So,
the next SDG is life on land, and in this SDG, desertification, deforestation, animal cruelty, and others. And I also gathered the specific interventions to address this problem, increase financial resource to conserve and sustainable use ecosystem and biodiversity finance. Then the next is peace, justice, and strong institution. I also used a survey form and torture of the children, abuse, cyberbullying, violence against children, and then the specific intervention to address to address the problems, reduce the violence everywhere, promote the rule of law, and ensure equal access to the justice, and etc. Then last is partnership for the goal. Then I also used the number 1 problem is the COVID-19, the first problem. Then the trading barriers, poor international cooperation, domestic revenue collection. Then I also gathered the specific interventions to address the problems, mobilize the resource to improve domestic revenue collection, mobilize financial resource for developing countries.